Hello, this is Mr. Johnson, and we are going to read the second chapter of Lunch Money. All right, here we go. It was near the end of fifth grade year. Around 11:31 morning, during silent reading, Greg felt hungry, so he had started to think about his lunch: a ham and cheese sandwich, a bag of nacho chips, Doritos, and a bunch of red grapes, and an apple cherry juice box. His mom made him a bag lunch, which was fine with Greg. Making lunch was a lot cheaper than buying one. Greg loves saving money whenever possible. Plus, home food was usually better than school food. And on the day he bought a bag lunch, his mom also gave him 50 cents to buy dessert, which was also fine with Greg. Sometimes he bought a treat, sometimes he held on to the money. On this particular day, he was planning on spending both quarters on an ice cream sandwich. Then Greg remembered his lunch was at home on the counter. He did have $1 of his own money in his wallet. He had 2 quarters from his mom in his front pocket, but a whole school lunch cost $2. He needed 2 more quarters. So Greg walked to the front of the classroom, waited until the teacher looked up from her book, and then said, "Miss McCormick, I left my lunch money. May I borrow 50 cents? Miss McCormick had not missed a teaching opportunity in over 20 years. So she shook her head in a voice loud enough for the whole class to hear. She said, "I'm sorry, but no, I will not lend you money. Do you know what would happen if I handed out 50 cents to all the boys and girls who forgot their lunches? I'd be broke. That's what. You need to learn to remember that these things for yourself." Then, turning to the class, Miss McCormick had announced, "Greg needs some lunch money. Can someone lend him 50 cents? Over half the kids in the class raised a hand. Embarrassed, Greg hurried over to Brian Lamont. Brian Lamont handed him 2 quarters. "Thanks," Greg said. "Pay me back tomorrow." 10 minutes later, Greg was in the cafeteria line, shaking all 4 quarters around in his pocket. He made a nice clinking sound. That made a nice clinking sound, and that had reminded Greg how much he liked quarters. Stacking up 4, and you've got $1. Stack up 20 quarters, that's $5. Greg remembered one day that he piled all the quarters of his dresser, 4 stacks. Each had been over a foot tall. Stacking up quarters like that always made Greg feel rich. On that day in April of 5th grade year, Greg started looking around the cafeteria, and everywhere he looked, he saw quarters. He saw kids trading quarters for ice cream sandwiches and cupcakes and cookies at the dessert table. He saw kids over at the school trading quarters for neon pens, sparkly pencils, and for little decoration like rubber soccer balls and plastic butterflies to stick on the end of their new pencils. He saw Albert Hobart drop 3 quarters into a machine so he could get an ice can cold juice with his lunch. Kids were buying extra food, fancy pens, pencils, drinks, snacks. There were quarters all over the place, buckets of them. And then Greg remembered those hands that had been raised back in the classroom, all those kids who had a couple quarters to lend him, extra quarters. Excited, Greg started making some calculations in his head. Another one of his talents. There were about 450 4th, 5th, 6th graders in Ashford Intermediate School. If half of those kids had 2 quarters each to spend every day, then there had to be at least 400 quarters floating around the school. With that was $100 a day, over $500 each week. Money, extra money, just jiggling around in pockets and lunch bags. At that moment, Greg's view of school was changed completely and forever. School had suddenly become the most interesting place on the planet because Greg Keaton had decided that school would be an excellent place to make his fortune.